James Jimmy MacSparran was born in 1898 in the Federal Hill neighborhood of Providence, Rhode Island, the second son of Seamus MacSparran and Bridget Connolly MacSparran, both first-generation Irish immigrants who came over from County Antrim in the early 1890s. Federal Hill was Italian territory by that point, but the Irish had carved out their own stubborn pocket of it, and the MacSparrans were as stubborn as any of them. Jimmy's older brother, Paddy, was the smart one, the one Father Donnelly had marked out for something better. Paddy had the kind of mind that retained things, that organized and cataloged and reasoned. The priest had him reading Latin at 13 and talking about the seminary by 15. Jimmy was the other one, the one with the hands. But that was never the whole truth of it. Anyone who stopped at the hands missed the most important thing entirely, because Jimmy also had eyes. Not just the physical apparatus, though those worked well enough until the boxing years put some mileage on them. What Jimmy had was the kind of attention that Federal Hill either developed in a boy or killed him. A low, patient, almost animal awareness of how things actually worked beneath the surface of how things appeared to work. Who deferred to whom in a given street corner, which conversations stopped when certain men walked by, and where money moved and whose hands it passed through along the way. The difference between the man who gave the orders and the man who merely seemed to. By 12 he was running errands for Sal Ferrante's numbers operation, carrying slips and occasionally small packages between points that he understood. Even then, he was not supposed to map in his memory. He mapped them anyway. Not out of ambition, not because he had any particular design in Ferrante's business, but because his mind would not simply leave a thing alone once it had started pulling at it. He knew which beat cops were on the payroll before he was 13, knew the routes, knew the rhythms, knew when the collections happened, and who made them nervous and why. Ferrante noticed. Ferrante was not a stupid man. He put Jimmy to slightly more interesting work, the kind that required not just reliable legs, but reliable discretion, locating people who had made themselves scarce, delivering messages to men who had reason not to want their addresses widely known, occasionally sitting outside a particular building at a particular time and taking a note of who came and went. Jimmy was, in the language Ferrante would have used if he had been inclined towards professional terminology, a natural. Father Donnelly noticed too, from a different angle with a considerably less satisfaction. Here was a boy, the priest understood, who was going to be very good at something. The question was what? His hand suggested one answer, the eye suggested another. That both answers currently pointed to the same direction, towards Ferrante and men like him, was the thing that kept Donnelly awake. By 14, Jimmy could knock a grown man down and not particularly feel bad about it. And he could tell you, before the man hit the floor, exactly why he had been where he was, who had sent him, and what 3 other things that implied about the situation you were actually in. The neighborhood called it toughness. Father Donnelly called it a waste. Jimmy called it Tuesday. What none of them called it yet, because the word had not yet arranged itself into the right shape in anyone's mind, was detective work. But that's what it was. Before the license and the office above a Bramowitz's tailor shop and the years of everything that came between, that is precisely what it was. A boy with good hands and better eyes, learning the first and most essential lesson of his eventual profession. That the truth is always there to be found. That people are always less hidden than they believe themselves to be. And that the world, for all its apparent chaos, runs on cause and effect as reliable as a church clock. The second lesson, that finding the truth and doing something useful with it are 2 entirely different problems, would take longer to learn. And the third was that sometimes what you discovered should have been impossible by any reasonable measure, and that Providence held more such impossibilities than most cities cared to admit. That truth still waited for him somewhere out in the future, patient and inevitable as the tide. What saved Jimmy from simply becoming another Federal Hill hardman was that someone put a proper pair of gloves on him and pointed him at the ring. He was 17 when Mickey Cahill, a semi-retired welterweight with a crooked nose and a gift for spotting talent, watched Jimmy dismantle 3 older boys in an alley behind a tavern on Atwell's Avenue and decided that sort of violence deserved a more organized venue. Under Cahill's tutelage, Jimmy developed into a middleweight of genuine, frightening ability. He was not elegant. He was never elegant. He had no interest in elegance. What he had was an almost preternatural capacity to absorb punishment and a right hand that fight writers would later describe, with varying degrees of poetry, as like catching a streetcar with your jaw. His record ran to 34 wins, 6 losses, and 2 draws over 9 years of professional fighting. The wins were mostly by stoppage, The losses were the interesting ones. Jimmy did not lose fights because he was outclassed. He lost them because he was occasionally outthought, and he carried each loss the way a Catholic carries sin, which is to say carefully, privately, and with the absolute certainty that he would one day have to account for it. He fought in Providence, Boston, New York, and once memorably in Chicago, where he knocked out a man named Del Vecchio on the 4th round and spent the following 3 days in a state of mild concussion that he remembers as one of the most pleasant experiences of his 20s. He never fought for a title. He came close twice. Both times something intervened. Second time something intervened, it was a man named Donovan Murtaugh. Murtaugh was a Providence fight promoter with mob connections and a moral compass of a weather vane. He had money riding on Jimmy's opponent, a Boston fighter named Carrillo, in what was supposed to be Jimmy's title shot. The arrangement, as Murtaugh saw it, was simple. Jimmy would go down in the 6th. Jimmy would be compensated. Everyone would be happy. Jimmy was not happy. Jimmy did not go down in the 6th. He put Carrillo down in the 4th, decisively and without apology. When he returned to his dressing room, he found Mickey Cale had been beaten badly enough to put him in Rhode Island hospital for 2 weeks. What Jimmy did to Donovan Murtaugh over the following 72 hours is a subject of some dispute among those who were present. What is not disputed is that Murtaugh required his own hospitalization, that Jimmy was arrested twice and released both times due to lack of witnesses willing to commit perjury against him, and that the title shot evaporated like morning dew. More to the point, what Jimmy did to Murtaugh disturbed Jimmy deeply. Not the beating itself, but the pleasure he had taken in it, the ease of it, the way it had felt the most natural thing in the world to reduce a man to a pleading, bleeding apology on a Providence floor and to feel, in that moment, something very close to righteousness. Father Donnelly, who was still alive and still watching Jimmy with that particular expression of grieving expectation that Irish parish priests had perfected over the centuries, told him that what he felt was not righteousness. That was the conversation that changed things. It is not accurate to say Jimmy MacSparran found religion in 1924. He had always had religion in the vague, ambient way that Irish Catholic boys from Federal Hill had religion, which is to say that it was present in the architecture of his life without particularly informing his behavior. What happened after Murtaugh was something more specific. Jimmy began, for the first time, to take it seriously. He was not a man given to mysticism or revelation. His conversion was not a thunderclap on the road to Damascus. It was a slower and more painful than that, more like a setting of a badly healed bone. Father Donnelly was patient with him in a way that Jimmy had never entirely been able to explain, given that he had given the man precious little reason for patience. What took root in Jimmy was a particular strain of Catholic moral thinking, not the comfortable social kind, the older, harder kind, the belief in objective good and evil. The soul has something real and worth preserving, and that the idea that a man was responsible for the consequences of his choices in a way that no circumstance entirely excused. He did not stop being violent. He never stopped being violent. But he began to be deliberate about it, which is a different thing entirely. Violence in Jimmy's new moral framework was a tool like any other. Tools were not evil. The use to which you put them was what mattered. He also stopped drinking and smoking, which was perhaps more significant for day-to-day quality of life, though the bottle still called to him like the perfume of an old flame that haunted his empty bed. He retired from boxing in 1925 with both eyes intact, both of his teeth, and a degree of brain damage that his doctor described as modest, all things considered. The transition to Private Dick was, in retrospect, almost absurdly logical. Jimmy was a man who was good at finding people who did not want to be found and persuading them to account for themselves. He had a reputation in Providence that opened certain doors and shut others. He understood the city's underside the way a man understands a scar, not because he admired it, but because it was part of him. He got his license in 1926 after a brief and mutually unsatisfying period working as an investigator for a Providence insurance firm. The firm found him insufficiently deferential to clients who were clearly lying. Jimmy found the firm insufficiently interested in what was actually true. He set up his own office on Westminster Street in 1927, 2 rooms above a tailor named Abramowitz, who pressed Jimmy's one good suit with a regularity that suggested either professional pride or a deep personal concern. His practice was small, mostly missing persons, infidelity work he takes to keep the lights on and despises, and the occasional piece of work for a defense attorney who needs something found that the police decline to look for. He has a working relationship with the Providence Police Department that is best described as armed neutrality. By the time our story begins, Jimmy MacSparran is 32 years old, 5'11", and built like a man who spent a decade being hit professionally and didn't entirely mind. His face tells that story honestly. A nose broken twice and set imperfectly both times. A small scar through his left eyebrow from a head clash in Boston Arena in 1921. Eyes that are a gray-green color and have the quality, several people have noted over the years, of looking at you as though they are already calculating something. He attends Mass at Holy Name Parish every Sunday and on holy days of obligation without fail. He goes to confession once a month, which he considers both a spiritual obligation and, given the nature of his work, a practical necessity. He believes in God, in the immortal soul, in objective morality, in the essential dignity of persons, and in the utility of hitting someone hard enough in the right place if all other approaches have been exhausted, and sometimes marginally before. He does not believe in coincidence. He does not believe in luck. He believes in cause and effect and the weight of choices, and the idea that the truth, however ugly, is always preferable to a comfortable lie. He is not a man who has made peace with the world. He is a man who decided to deal with the world as it actually is, which is not the same thing. Father Donnelly, now quite elderly, still regards him with that expression of grieving expectation, though it has lately acquired a thread of something that might, in better lighting, be pride. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. This is kind of an experiment. I'm going to see if this works out, me telling stories while I draw. Should be kind of fun, and if you like it, let me know, and I'll keep doing it. If not, fuck you. Later.